to do is give a bit of an introduction to what the vision for this, or the intent of this Terence Day thing is, a little bit of the history, and then some thoughts about Terence's thought. So this was titled Terence McKenna, His Life and Thought, rather than Life and Time, sometimes people do. His notions, which one of them have held water and are coming into the 2020s, which one had legs? Because I know certainly some did for me, and it ended up driving my research. And I can share some of that. And then I'd like to pass it to Dennis, who has a driver's seat view of his brother. And then we'll just open it up for just what Terence loved best, which was the Q&A, just free-flowing Q&A. I see Dennis nodding. Is Dennis nodding to this? Yes. And you're muted still, my brother. Oh, there we go. Does that sound reasonable, Dennis?
Sounds good to me.
Great. So it's pretty freeform and pretty light.
Yeah.
Because this is the Levity Salon, and I established this idea of levity in 2012 when we finished the whole year of celebrating Terence, and I was starting to do a lot more public talks in the manner of Terence, when he would question everything and reformulate everything from a psychedelic base, from a visionary standpoint, and be very entertaining. And so, having learned a little bit about this from him, I decided to finally jump onto the dangerous side of the pool and jump into the deep end and start doing these talks. And when I came up with the name for my podcast, I called it the Levity Zone, because Terence and I, in our conversations, we would talk about novelty all the time, novelty. And at one point I turned to him and said, Terence, we have enough novelty. We just need more levity. And so hence the Levity Salon. And 10 years after Terence's passing, just rewinding the clock I'm on two screens. So thank you. You just see myself from both angles. Thank you, Schwan. So as Terence was getting ill and it was clear that he was going to pass, we met in Hawaii at the Alchemical Arts meeting, and it was really a goodbye to him for everybody. And it was a beautiful and profound meeting. And at that meeting is where Lorenzo Haggerty and I met, and where the incident with the elvish getaway car occurred, where I had a vision of Terence entering into this bejeweled Fabergé egg mobile and being taken up through the azure veil. This is lying on the floor next to him at the end of the meeting after Constance Demby's beautiful concert, which she's just passed. And I just want to make an honoring of Connie's beautiful life and work. The New York Times obituary came out today for her work, and I'm so glad that there was a New York Times obituary. And she performed at Alchemical Arts. She shipped her space base by ship, and she came to our Terence 2012 event that Lorenzo and I did at Sierra Madre, and also played, because at that time she was living in Sierra Madre, and it was just so special to have that connection of this visionary, fantastic symphonic electronic artist in the room with us to honor Terence in 2012. And at the end of the 1999 meeting, we all lay on the floor, and that's when the elvish bejeweled Fabergé getaway car vision happened. But that getaway car vision was a message, in a way, that Terence and his legacy were going to be committed to cyberspace, this medium that so fascinated him. And 5 years later, I woke up in bed saying, Terence, you left too soon. I and others are going to bring you back. And that started a collaboration with Lorenzo to pull together cassette tapes. And we got our first box of cassette tapes from Ralph Abraham of the Trialogues. And he said, here, take them. Trialogues Press. And like, do we have permission? Yes, here, take them. And so we digitized 90 cassettes in a weekend on 3 boom boxes. And that was fuel for the psychedelic Salon. And so that was, in a sense, the beginnings of trying to bring Humpty Dumpty back together again, put him back together, because a year after that, there was a fire in Pacific Grove, California, which wiped out Terence's document archive in a tragic way, just gone. It was Eslin's in-town office and it was gone. And so Lorenzo and I were sort of redouble our effort. Well, then for Terence's legacy, all we've got is what is out there. There's no central archive of his personal writings. And I have to shout out to Kevin Whitesides. He's done a similar thing in collecting extant materials to build a beautiful library in the transcription project for Terence's life and thought. And so then that rolled forward. And Terence, one of his great, I think, monikers, if you will, is boundary disillusion. And what did he mean by boundary disillusion? I think what he meant was, it's very personal. If you're standing in a room and you're socially anxious like I was when I was a kid, I would put up barriers to everyone. You know, I would be immediately afraid by default of humans. I wouldn't look them in the eye. And that was my boundary. And I spent an entire lifetime softening that boundary. And I used the elixirs, which I had sometimes use as a term for the sacred medicines, the entheogens. I love the term elixir because it's magic. It's a healer, but it's also magic potion. It's empowering, and it's a tool. And it's sort of, elixirs are created by druids or something. You know, there's sort of a vision of where elixirs come from. So these elixirs helped me dissolve my boundaries. The fact that I can look into a Zoom camera at each of your eyes and not feel a retraction into my Asperger-y self is a testament to the power of my own journey and volition, but these elixirs as well, softening those boundaries. And humanity collectively has boundaries around itself and its institutions, and mistrust and fake news and fake elections, and you know, all this sort of craziness is about isolation. It's about dissociation. But when a person is open and malleable but discerning, accepting of others, they can run the operating system of another person in a kind of realming exercise. They can have empathy for that person, and boundaries can dissolve between any red or blue political party positions. Anything can all dissolve. We can just be human beings, but in a modern sense, not in the hippie sense, in the modern sense of understanding the reason that that person is feeling the way they are is because of some internal process, like an internal part or family system or some personality, and something bad happened to them when they were very young. And it created this deep response that they can help work through if they can see it. And we can help them work through it. So then there isn't this deep response that isn't helping them or the people around them. And that, in a sense, is the great technology of the 21st century, is healing those parts. And these elixirs are one of the tools. And then all of the surrounding integration and beautiful support of people who've had their boundaries softened by elixirs. How do you help them after that, when they've really gotten there? You know, and we're learning it. We're going to have MDMA as psychotherapy. We're going to have psilocybin shortly. We're going to have thousands of people serving hundreds of thousands and millions of people through PTSD and things like that, which is also really boundary dissolution. So that's why back in 2010, when it was the 10th anniversary of Terence's passing, I think Lorenzo was here. We had an event. Nick Herbert was here, an event in the house, and I just said, it's the International Boundary Dissolution Day, Terence Day. Why not? You know, that was one of his greatest thoughts. So with that, you know, my relationship with Terence is mostly after the fact. At the meeting in Hawaii, he was sitting there actually holding Matt's book, holding the book called, gosh, what was it called? There's pictures of him holding Matt's book. Anyway, looked up and said, posthumous glory, that's where the action is.
I heard him say that. Posthumous, that's where the money is.
That's the action, or the money is.
That's
Anyway,
where the money is.
so the upshot is there is posthumous glory if we can understand who this man was and what he contributed, his foibles, his shortcomings, his brilliance, his psychedelic entertainment persona, the cage of fame that he got himself into, the conundrums, and the sort of dislocation from the logos that we've chronicled, that Dennis and I chronicled back in 2012. But we still love him. He's still with us. He belongs to our community because we're the only people that can recreate him in cyberspace, and continue to love and appreciate him and be in the glow of his storytelling prowess, which takes us into those worlds. Let's face it, it takes us into those worlds, and it's done with humor and love and levity. I would suggest his presentation isn't about his own ego. It's not about, am I right or wrong? It's just the pure joy of the transmission that he's trying to faithfully give, and his wonderful expressions like, how can they keep the lid on this thing? It's just wonderful. And so it's really it's a spring day. You can hear the chimes out here. It's a sort of the fact that this guy was around and did this thing and had the courage to do it, and survived a whole lot of stuff to do and to bring all this thing. Nature loves courage. It's something to be celebrated. I wouldn't suggest any one of us should lead Terence's life over again, as I would think that nobody should lead Tim Leary's life over again, but we can lead our own lives, our own heroes' journeys, with some reference to the courage and to the chutzpah and the off-the-wallism of Terence McKenna. And with that, I'd like to pass it to, I'll mute myself. Everyone who can mute in due respect, we'll pass it on to Dennis.
Okay, well, thanks, Bruce. That's a wonderful tribute to Terence, and I think this is the community that he would have been most comfortable in. I see so many people that I know, and it's really kind of you to organize this. As you know, last year on April 3rd was the 20th anniversary of Terence's passing, and we organized a number of events around that stretched over the following weeks through this nonprofit that I founded about a year ago called the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy. And we had Bruce on. The celebration of that 20th anniversary was basically a series of interviews between myself and some of Terence's closest friends, of which Bruce is one. And we had different online conversations. I guess you could call them virtual fireside chats at that time. Bruce was one of the first, and we also had Luis Eduardo Luna, Ralph Abraham, Rupert Sheldrake, Wade Davis, Paul Stamets, all of whom were close friends of Terence. And then we also, as a bonus, we had another session with this brilliant young man, the son of Rupert Sheldrake, Merlin Sheldrake, appropriately named, who had just completed his book called Entangled Life, how fungi, I forget the full title, it was quite long, but if you haven't read that book, it's a wonderful book. A celebration of fungal biology. I learned a lot from it. So that was kind of the, that was the genesis of this event. And then this year, Bruce decided to organize this celebration of Terence. So I'm honored and to be here, and I look forward to sharing thoughts with you. I think that Terence, as Bruce said, one of the more remarkable things about Terence, he was absolutely right that maybe posthumously is where the real money is, or the real mojo is, in a certain sense, because the man has been deceased for 21 years, yet he has a much higher profile in cyberspace than I do. And I'm very much alive so far, although there are days I wonder. But so I'm not jealous. I mean, it's earned, and I'm happy to be part of his fan base, and also, of course, his brother. He was a remarkable person in his visionary, I don't know what you could call them, insights or talents. Many of his ideas don't stand up to scrutiny. In a certain sense, if you try to double down on the details of some of his notions about time, for example, or the time wave, but they are certainly interesting, and in their own way, that they bring their own validity to that. But if you back up to the 30,000 foot level and look at what he was talking about, in that respect, I think Terence was absolutely correct in the notion that we do seem to be approaching some kind of historical singularity. And one of the criteria, one of the predictions of the time wave theory, and this idea that, time is headed towards some sort of resolution. I mean, this is really an inheritance from our Catholic background. Christianity and Catholicism particularly, which we both struggled to recover from, but is built into that notion as the notion of eschatology. And Terence always predicted that things were going to get very strange as we approach the singularity. I often wonder if he had survived to this day, if he would look around and he would basically say, "Yep, what did I tell you?" Because we are certainly in an odd place historically and planetarily, on politically, on just every level. I mean, it's as though reality itself has begun to warp and fragment. It's not your father's reality. It's not even our reality of 10 or 20 years ago. So it's a whole new world. There are aspects of it that are quite disturbing, and other aspects that are quite amazing and hopeful. And I guess that's the case of any historical epoch. Probably every civilization that has existed thinks that they live on the edge of the end of the world. And in fact, they are right, but what's different about this era is that we're a global civilization. So if our civilization is at the edge of the history as we know it. I guess the question is, what follows history as we know it, and what will that look like? It's likely it has been quite a ride, and it's likely to continue. And it's not clear what the outcome will be. It seems that there are so many trends that are pointing in the direction of planetary catastrophe, apocalypse, if you will. But there are many brands of apocalypse. I think it's safe to say that we are living through some kind of an apocalypse. It's not a rapid one. It's not the kind of apocalypse you would experience through a collision with a massive asteroid. That would kind of bring the show to a close. It's a different kind of thing. And I think that we're experiencing this through COVID and other trends. In some ways, COVID is a gift, because it's a wake-up call from nature, but it's not completely destructive, although we're still living out to what extent it's going to destabilize our populations, our civilizations, and so on. But it's kind of a gentle apocalypse in a certain way, a gentle reminder that, in fact, we are not running the show. Nature is running the show. And that's been a message that I've been propagating for many years. And I've always said, and this is still true, nature, natural psychedelics such as the mushrooms, ayahuasca, and so on are also ambassadors from Gaia. They are messengers from nature that are basically sending the message to us that we need to wake up. And once we wake up, we need to wise up. We need to become wise in terms of the choices that we make going forward and the messages that we share with other people. So Terence was the kernel of that. He was the original messenger in a certain way, or articulator of this message, which I think comes not from him, but from Gaia, from nature itself. But he was a spokesman for all that and one of the best voices in that realm. So we all miss him very much, but at the same time, he's very much present with us. He's not gone away. As long as cyberspace exists, he will be here. So he's achieved this kind of strange form of immortality, maybe one of the first to do this. And as we move more and more into cyberspace, I suppose there will be others that follow, probably already are. But we certainly live in interesting times, and I wish that Terence was here so that he could share his wisdom with us, so that he could comment on what is happening. I am quite sure that as strange as things have gotten and as different as things are from they were in 2000 when he passed on, he probably wouldn't be surprised. He anticipated all of this. He was talking about it in the early 90s. Many of the people who he has most influence in our current cultural era were not even in diapers when he was talking about it, or were just in diapers, and yet they grew up. They may never have encountered Terence, but they encountered him through the medium of cyberspace, and it's been a very influential message that he's transmitted. So I'm honored to be included among this illustrious group, and I thank Bruce and Lorenzo and everyone else, Charles, who helped organize this event. Thank you very much. This is very sweet and very kind thing for you to do. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And I want to make sure that we give a little bit of time right up front to Lorenzo Haggerty, who's right below me. Literally, I'm on top of Lorenzo here in the Zoom, because Lorenzo has done, I think, as much as anyone to propagate Terence into cyberspace for all of us. And I want to really sort of, there's funny stories all around this, but Lorenzo has published so many of Terence's talks. I mean, 250, I don't even know, so many over so many years, that occasionally, I don't know, it was once or twice, he actually published the same talk 5 or 6 years later, not recalling that it had already been published. And he did the same intro, the same sort of thoughts around it came up for him from his library, like, it's a new talk by Terence and blah, 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 blah. And then the fans would write, like, you did that in 2008, and you said the same comments. And it's a commentary on the voluminousness of Terence's work, but nobody minded listening to it again. But it also is a commentary on the great extent and dedication of Lorenzo's work to this community and to Terence's legacy. So I'd like to offer, you can do anything you want, pound a pulpit or do whatever you want, tell a joke.
Well, you know, the thing about Terence is that you should never just listen once to any of his talks. I've listened to some of them a dozen times, and I get something different, you know, something new each time. Because what happens is as Terence is talking, he'll say something that you'll start thinking about it, and by the time you stop thinking about that and get back down to where he is talking, well, he's changed the subject, and you've missed something in the gap. So there's so much there. Also, that phrase about posthumous glory in my podcast number 151, which came in, I think, August 7th, 2008, that is a recording of the event where he did say that. He was on that panel, and they were talking about coming out of the closet. And what he actually said was posthumous glory. That's where the action is. And as he was saying it, you were there, you can remember seeing his face. He could see these words coming out of his mouth in slow motion, and he almost wanted to catch him. And there was just dead silence, no pun intended. There was this long silence after he said it. And all of a sudden he started laughing in that characteristic chuckle of his, you know, and broke the ice. That was a good moment. So yeah, they're counting the talks of his that I've done twice. I think there's 2 or 3 of those. There are now like 300 Terence McKenna talks up there on the Psychedelic Salon, and you know, Bruce is responsible for obtaining most of those. That you know, he made the contact with Ralph Abraham, and then I came up there and we borrowed the tapes from Ralph and stayed up for 3 days digitizing them in the old-fashioned way, and then. Also at Esalen, Bruce is the one that put together the whole thing at Esalen that we did. And that's where we got the big case of tapes as well. So, and then of course, during the course of the last 16 years, people have been sending them to me left and right. So there's such a treasure trove of them now. And you know, I'm convinced he's not going to be forgotten. And then young people are coming in that are just finding him for the first time, you know, that are in their early 20s. And it's going to be a whole new renaissance of Terence McKenna fans, I think, coming out from what I see.
Thank you, Lorenzo. And a little note, I was a speaker, I was the opening speaker at a conference for an organization called IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences, in the summer of 2019. And at the reception, I looked across the room and there was Rupert Sheldrake. So we talk about Ralph. There was Ralph, Rupert, and Terence in the trialogues. You know, these wonderful, and that was our seed material for, in a sense, for the Salon. I saw him across the room, and I wanted to meet him, but I just didn't know how. I'd never met the man. And then suddenly he was at my elbow. There he was, and Dennis Green, the main fundraiser, a wonderful man who I'm now working with, had brought him over because Rupert wanted to connect. And the first thing he said was, well, we were just starting to talk. And I said, did you know that Lorenzo Haggerty and I have digitized those trialogues tapes way back, you know, from a dusty old box? He turned to me and he said, those trialogue tapes have done more to launch my career in the public with a larger number of people than anything I've done in my entire career, any book, anything. And I never knew who did this. I never knew who had done this. And I've met the man or the guys that did this. It changed my life. And so that,
you know, I'm really hoping to meet Rupert someday, because that book that they published of the trialogues on the edge of the West, I've got it autographed by both Ralph and Terence. And the only autograph I don't have is Rupert's on that. That'll make that book much more precious to me if I can get Rupert's autograph someday. But yeah, that really opened a lot for us, those trialogues.
Dennis might remember that when Dennis was staying here in 2013 on the book tour for the Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, stayed over here, and I brought out the copy that Terence had given of Invisible Landscape, the second edition, with Terence's wonderful, like, our most important work, you know, and his long scribbled signature, blah, 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 1999, yeah, or 98, whenever it was. And right below it, I now have the signature, Dennis McKenna, from after the singularity, 2013. It's a wonderful, precious thing. So with that, are there, I know we have Kevin Whitesides here. We have people that have, Kevin has a deep and abiding daily presence with Terence's work. Kevin, are you, do you like to just tell us about the archive project and the transcription project?
Sure, yeah, it's been going on for in stronger and weaker cycles for almost a decade now. The basic thing is to gather as much as can be possibly found. So I've like worked through libraries and scanned things from microfilm and done interlibrary loans and contacted artists who made like special handmade issues of things with rare interviews with Terence. So I've got a website up with a pretty up-to-date catalog of all the interviews, and I've got correspondences that I scanned from Cat with all of his correspondences with his publishers as he was publishing each of the books. So like his back and forth, what was going on with the publishers, and all these shelves here are filled with books that he wrote or was interviewed in, or somebody made a comment about him. So I'm basically trying to maintain as good a record as is possible of not only Terence's personal imprint, but also his influence, what has like his ongoing influence and what people are still saying about him. And so I'm trying, I'm working at it, and it's a lot of fun. And I've got to connect with a lot of great people as a result of it. And it's ongoing, yeah. And as he said, there's a transcription project. So all of his talks eventually will be transcribed and searchable and downloadable and analyzable in various ways.
And Kevin, you're about to defend your PhD thesis. Does it involve Terence?
No, I just defended my dissertation prospectus, so my proposal for the research. It's actually an analysis, it's a large-scale digital analysis of the 2012 literature, so it will involve Terence in a way, but as we know, the 2012 thing got far beyond Terence, but he was a central influence in how it started and developed. So I'll be doing that work for another couple of years.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And Charles, is there, unless there's someone else who's got a really pressing, like who's working actively on them, just looking through here, I think we can just open it to the wonderful Q&A that Terence loves so much.
I do a lot of work in communications, especially around social justice movements. And Terence's work, and by extension, Ralph Abraham and Rupert Sheldrake and all the way down the line, has inspired me a lot. And I was wondering, Dr. Damer, if you could, I don't know, synthesize or talk about the collaborative aspect of your the origin of life thing, and Terence's often said, you know, culture is not your friend. And it speaks to me a lot about, especially this country, the US's response to the whole pandemic situation, particularly in how it left a lot of people just devastated, not only out in the cold financially, but totally isolated with all the Zoom things. And where do we go from here as a species? Because for me, it was like one of the most profound moments of my life. And I was like, this is something way bigger than any of us actually understand what is actually happening. So if that makes any sense, if you could speak to that.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah, this is coming up quite a bit. So I'll try to join two things together. A conversation with Terence in the late 90s in his house in Hawaii, where we asked the question, Terence loved to talk about novelty, as I mentioned in the opening remarks, and I talked about levity, but that sparked me in like, what does he mean by novelty? Well, in complexity science, that's when things become more complex and don't lose their complex structure, because the universe is a massive backward and forward ratchet. Stars explode, generate a whole bunch of new compounds, but then those dissipate and there's no star. And then sometime later, some of those compounds end up in a star, which is of a different size, and it may be heavier, so it can compress stuff more. And when it goes into a supernova, you get things like gold, that were impossible earlier in the universe. You get heavier and heavier elements. So the universe complexifies. At the origin of life, and so this is where I took Terence's question on novelty, how does it work, to do my PhD work, starting University College, finishing at University College Dublin. So yes, I'm an Irish doctor, but doing the work at UC San Diego to simulate a gigantic cosmic soup, cosmochemistry, diffuse atoms colliding, and where very few bonds ever form. This is called a hypopopulated reaction graph by Stuart Kauffman. So I said, okay, let's create the most diffuse cold system we can that we know happens between stars, cosmochemistry, and let's simulate it and see if bonds form faster depending on different conditions. And we found it in on April Fool's Day, which was just a while back, April Fool's Day in 2011, the chart of the plot of bonds started to go up faster and faster, and it staircased. So like 2 bonds became 6 bonds, became 12 bonds, and the simulation was now running uphill away from equilibrium, and we were getting more and more molecules formed in this virtual soup. And that would allow me to defend my PhD thesis 2 months later. It was just a last minute freaking thing. And I call it the cosmic wiggle, because stuff was wiggling and becoming more complex and more complex and more complex. And I asked the question, is this the general formalism of novelty formation, of concrescence into novelty, as Terence used to like to quote Whitehead? And I think it is, because we took this same idea of away from equilibrium stacking of complex things into Origin of Life when I met Dave Deemer back in 2009. And now we've shown chemically how we can form protocells in cycling warm little ponds in hot springs that go through wet, dry, and moist cycles. And those things get together and they pinch down into flat lamellae during the dry phase, form RNA in long chains from the monomers. And then when they bud off, like a bathtub ring, they bud off back into the bathtub, they're full of polymers. We can stain the solutions, and we can see it. We've done it in Rotorua, in actual live hot springs now. And it's become a movement. It's become a scientific revolution. Starting with, we had a Scientific American cover story in 2017. Then a year ago, right about now, it was astrobiology. It was a cover story, and the full hypothesis that Dave and I had come up with was fully spelled out after years of development. And now it's being tested by dozens of teams, being worked on by graduate students. And we think that it's the cosmic wiggle, the novelty interpreted into chemistry to explain how life began on the Earth. But one of the great downloads of this discovery, because it truly is a discovery, I think of it as a discovery as significant as some of the ones in physics, is that and I'll explain it to you in the simplest way possible, that could change our entire philosophy. If you have a flabby, flimsy little protocell in that pool 4 billion years ago, and you shake that pool or you change the temperature, that protocell is going to fall apart. And we see this in our laboratory work and in the hot springs. If those protocells, as the pool is drying down, are clumped together into a group, they're more stable. It's like bathtub, like a bubble of bathtub of foam versus a big clump of foam. It's self-stabilizing. And that's the basic principle on which we think life can start. And if you have thousands or millions of protocells, each with different polymers in them, all in this sludge during the dry down phase, they can set up chemical circuits and through collaboration and sharing, generate metabolic cycles, generate more polymers that they go through the dry phase and they bud back off into trillions of populations subject to stresses. Now you have a form of selection. It's combinatorial. There's no genes yet. And we've been able to do this and watch the freaking population grow larger and larger and larger. It's like something's growing in front of our very eyes, but it only grows because we have a collaborative system. At the most simple level, everything is just clumped together in a sludge. And it might seem, well, that's trivial. Of course that would be more stable, but it turns out to be a general principle, because early microbial communities, and I always hold up I should have brought it up for you guys, a stromatolite with little ripples in the rock, 3 billion years old, that we collected in Australia. Those were also clumped together. Those were also in what's called a consortium model, where everything is collaborating. The top layer is collecting sunlight. There's a detrital eating layer. There's metabolic ones. There's like 1,000 species in there, all working together to exquisitely adapt to that portion of the hot spring or the seashore or wherever it is. And that's the dominant form of life for 90% of Earth's history. And if you look outside, in the forest, you're looking out into the redwood forest up here, those trees are growing. They're an expression of the microbial mat that has become the progenote planet, has become the Earth. It's become Gaia, fraught, through with mycelial layers, immense numbers of microbes, and everything is exquisitely dependent on the base of that collaborative consortia. And when Victorians first, tried to characterize evolution and came up with terms in the 19th century like red in tooth and claw, or survival of the fittest, this was Spencer's idea. They were looking at animals. They didn't understand cell biology. They didn't understand microbial community biology. So they saw everything as, well, species in competition, dogs fighting other dogs, or the species on the plains of Africa. And that's the lens they were looking through. But the 21st century lens, not only is it that's a limited view, that kind of competition does create evolutionary adaptation, that kind of organismal competition. But really how life is working is this platform. The plains of Africa themselves are the platform that permits the tiger or the lion to hunt the gazelle. And it's a privilege to have complex organisms, but they're all supported on that platform that is deeply collaborative. So if we can show to the world from hardcore, dialed in reductionist science, just like in physics, where Einstein, it was shown that general relativity worked because starlight bent around the sun during the eclipse of 1919. That's hardcore gearhead stuff. It's not coming from a woo philosophy or an ideology. It's coming from fundamental discovery. So people really take that seriously. But if we can show in our laboratory dishes that for life to get started, it is deeply collaborative, deeply cross-linked, and that we can characterize that collaboration, and we can characterize a healthy system versus not a dangerously, as what Dennis was saying, we can reformulate how we best manage our affairs and our civilization and our world. And that can be a great project of the 2020s, taking the fundamental discovery in science, taking some of Terence's warnings and his intimate connection with the mushroom, which in some sense was a message about deep collaboration. Because what are fungi? Fungi are things that are dependent upon breaking down detrital material, but also supplying, like these redwoods out here, supplying minerals and other things from the soil to the redwoods, as the redwoods supply carbohydrates back through their roots to the fungal mass, because the fungi don't generate their own stuff. They need other things, and it's deeply, it allows the forest to heal itself. And so, Terence being connected to that world, the admonition for our civilization is we can't afford to break either information connections, the trust in our memory, or our probabilistic potential. And I'll speak more to that later if you want, but that's what we've come up with so far. for a healthy, collaborative, networked 21st century type civilization informed by this fundamental new discovery, almost theoretical discovery. So that's a long-winded answer to a short question.
I'm kind of changing the subject, but I definitely love how the origin of life work ties into Terence's notion about needing a new myth. And that's something that really resonated with me in Terence's work. So very cool. So I think this question's for Dennis, but it might be for Bruce too. So I've heard Bruce say in the past that Terence was like our greatest poet. And really trying to put a label on Terence is a difficult task. Terence regarded alchemy as kind of this linguistic enterprise, or like an enterprise of kind of testing the boundaries of language. I'm wondering, Dennis and maybe Bruce, how you feel about the question, like, was Terence our greatest alchemist or greatest modern alchemist? Is that a better label or title to discuss when it comes to Terence?
Well, I guess you could say that. It depends on what the material of the alchemical process is. And it's alchemy is about many things. Alchemy is a concept that it basically involves transformation. And Terence was not a chemist. He didn't work with matter as an alchemist or a chemist might. He worked with language. That was for him the material of alchemical transformation. So I think it's legitimate to say that he was an alchemist of language. He's often been called the bard or the poet, and he was a creator with words. He could create these word constructs that somehow they made sense, whether they did or not. He had a unique talent of presenting ideas that, no matter how wacko, how outlandish they seemed, he could actually make them seem plausible. And it wasn't so much what he said as the way he said it. I mean, he had this ability to, in a group, absolutely mesmerize the people and the people listening. I mean, few people ever stood up to say, wait a minute, this is horseshit. This doesn't mean anything. You're just talking nonsense. And he did. A lot of times he did, and yet the nonsense seemed plausible when it came from him. So he was, and that's the essence of storytelling. And he was a tremendous storyteller, and he could paint these wordscapes. I think you could call him, an artist in the visual sense, as much as he was an oral artist, in that he could create these constructs of words that just issued forth so beautifully. It didn't really matter if it made sense, because at the time it seemed to make sense, even though 20 minutes downstream in one of his spiels, he'd be saying the exact opposite, and that didn't make sense either. I mean, I used to kid him about this, that, he didn't so much like me to go to his public events because I'm the only person. Well, there were exceptions, but usually I was the only person who would stand up and say, well, wait a minute, what you said 20 minutes ago directly contradicts what you're saying now, and that doesn't make any sense either. And he would say, well, consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. And he would just continue on his role, So he was a poet. He was like a, an artist of words. If you want to call it alchemy, yeah, I guess you could call it alchemy. Certainly alchemy in the sense that it fostered transformation. I think that many of Terence's words and inspiration has transformed many people's lives, including my own. And I am privileged to have been maybe the only person in this for him that actually knew him from day one. I mean, he was around when I was born and I was around when he died. So our lives were enmeshed over that whole period. So I'll let it go there. That's a long answer to a good question, Evan.
Lorenzo, just did you want to jump in on that?
Well, just very quickly to solidify what Dennis said, one of Terence's quotes was, "The story you tell yourself is largely the story you are living," which in essence says, you know, you're an alchemist, you're creating your own life. And he did use words as alchemy. I think that's a good insight.
I think there's an interesting connection between psycho-cybernetics, which was kind of coming about at that time. And I think that really inspired Alan Watts too during that time. Interesting.
Well, thank you. I think that Bruce and Dennis and Lorenzo have all spoken a little bit toward what I was going to mention. And it's not so much a question, but it could be a topic that is resonating among us. And it's basically the chaos that we find ourselves in, and dealing especially with the fact that, you know, the internet has opened up communication so broadly to everyone in the world. And the level of conversation is now at such a fever pitch that it's almost destroyed the ability to understand truth at all. You know, people just keep saying, well, the truth is out there and I just need to find it and find the facts and you'll understand it. But even in some of the hard sciences, which I'm not very much of a hard scientist myself, but it seems as though sometimes there's always room for interpretation. There's always room for another viewpoint or perspective on something. So I guess what I'm wondering, back in Terence's time, he would looked at the internet and said, what a wonderful thing it is we're able to communicate so rapidly with everyone. This is going to open up, you know, discussion and provide such a benefit to humanity, and it certainly has. I mean, the ability for science channels and data to flow is tremendously grown, and the ability for people to understand viewpoints and religious standpoints, but all along with that has grown just this sludge of incredible pseudoscience and other you know, anti-facts and hatred and the ugliest sides of human nature, and you know that we can determine. It's like, it really is like this amazingly chaotic soup of something. It reminds me of some of the primordial soups that you know saw new life forms being growing out of. And I wonder to myself, you know, what organically will come of something like this? Will it be something that we can help guide? Is there such a thing as a positive outcome, or is it more of a, you know, the earth will always be here without us kind of the thing? It's not positive or negative. It's sort of indifferent to us, even though we harm it. So I guess it's just
I have a
yeah.
bunch of thoughts, because this came up in Clubhouse an hour
Okay,
ago.
go ahead. That's what I wanted, a bunch of thoughts.
So what's interesting is, no matter what we think about our civilization and our volition, we are subject to the laws of Darwinian natural selection that is rolls through it. It selects businesses, memes, people in and out of the system. So at the high level, there's a reaper that is going through, cutting, selecting, and we can't really see it because it's immense. And it's the reaper of ideas, it's the reaper of individual health or national success, or whether my company survives or doesn't, whatever. It's still Darwinian selection. So if you go way out, let's take COVID for an example. So COVID-19 was in the wings for so long, right? That we had coronaviruses. When I was in Singapore in 2003, there was a SARS-2 scare. So it was one of those things that was waiting to jump into the human pool. It was just a matter of time. Amazingly, it jumps into the human pool globally just as the new internet nervous system emerged strongly enough with the all-important smartphone to allow us to innovate tools to slow the spread of the contagion, like GPS, social positioning, etc., knowing who you met because you're carrying around a GPS device. It's a supercomputer. And so instead of it hitting us like in 1919 with Spanish flu, where it killed 100 to 250 million people worldwide, a chunk of the world's population, we have the ability to respond. We also had companies working on mRNA vaccines that were in the wings. And it was a test of our civilization. It was like nature loves courage, right? Nature's saying, okay, this population has got big enough that there's weaknesses. And the natural selection part of viral infections, where I grew up, you had deer populations exploding and surging, and then a viral disease come through in British Columbia and kill them. And they finally, like, this is ridiculous. We've created foraging areas through clear-cut logging, and wolves have been shot by ranchers. And of course, we're getting these surges of deer populations and then these contagions coming through. Get it back into balance. We need some more predators. We need to change our logging practices and everything. And so we learn to manage those populations as humans. Nature is managing us. So for instance, coronavirus, when it first started, I took my long 4 billion year evolutionary view and saying, this is potentially the ideal circumstance. What we have is a lightweight, very low lethality virus. It's not Spanish flu. It's not going to be a horror. It's not going to be Ebola. It's going to come through the population and give us a light touch all the way through. It's going to take a small percentage of us, and it's going to test our systems, and it's going to teach us. It's going to be an incredible teacher. It'll slow down the metabolic action of humans, stop travel, slow down certain businesses, get people to actually spend more time with their families. I know Aaron spends so much time with his kids because the kids, they're homeschooling. It has caused trauma and dislocation, but it slowed the metabolic rate enough that last spring there was a slight surge in bee population around here, just because of the lower emissions of atmospheric gas that was going on. What can happen next is, as we responded, just as in Darwinian selection, we respond with an mRNA-based vaccine, and it bounces off that vaccine, and it's going to start to adapt to that vaccine, find its way into the pool again. So a COVID variant in 2024 might be more lethal. And what is happening is the culling of our herd. So weaker individuals, people who might refuse to take vaccine, refuse the immuno response that our scientists developed, may be taken out of the herd. And more people may be taken out, maybe 10, 15, 20% of the population over the next 10 years may be taken out by waves. And this is a non-catastrophic way. The other solution to our problem is lower our birth rate or lower our consumption rate. We're not lowering our consumption rate anytime really soon. So we're called down constantly. And in 2030 or 2040, we're a different world. We have gotten an international discipline that we didn't have in 2019 when it was just complete chaos. My life was chaos in 2019. I took 19 international trips, burning my system out. I thought I had to, and I didn't have to. And it was a huge amount of body wear and tear on me. And it rebooted my life onto a new platform. It's made me more contemplative. It slowed my metabolic system down before I would go through burnout crash. And it's almost like this was the same sort of thing. So if you look at I'm a positivist, a gearhead, and I said, wow, look at the power of the response of the biosphere, the bolus swinging around, and all these trillions of pathways being sought to pull the system more into equilibrium. And it's just going to happen. It's going to happen to us from this massive field effect that we're in called the living biosphere, that is an intelligence of a form. It's not, read you from the dictionary intelligence. It is a huge, super adaptive system that has responded to asteroid strikes. It has responded to planetary freeze-overs, ice ages, everything, and allowed vibrant biosphere to return after huge traumas. And we are a challenge to the biosphere, but we're also spreading a new biosphere. We're spreading the biosphere of cities and dogs and monocultures and whatever, we're spreading life, we're changing it, we're genetically adapting to it, but the fundamental principles of selection are still in force. And so I look forward to a whole 21st century of watching, if I live much into it, watching the selective tuning of our civilization by all these stresses. And so, for example, here's an example being in the age of viral pandemic, people who deny the existence of the pandemic are taken out of the gene pool. And so then you get a population that's more tuned to survive future pandemics because those were purporting an ideology that they don't exist or something that disturbed people's response are gone. And this has been human history for 20,000 years. We dealt with pandemics. In fact, in Washington, D.C. at the time of John Adams, everyone, this is about 1800, you had to leave Washington, D.C. in the summer because of the yellow fever that was coming up from the south. That was going to take a whole chunk of that population out. So the people of means decanted from Foggy Bottom back to their farms to escape the sure thing of the disease that was coming through. And we forget that this is what we've had to live with for, since the birth of our species, and it's back. And it's going to do a number on a tuning on us. And it's already made us smarter and more intelligent. Down in the house here, the house that you saw originally on the video, is my friend Alex, who formed a company that will do drug delivery in small lipid compartments called exosomes that are peppered with proteins. And this is the future beyond the mRNA vaccine. This is a future drug delivery technology that will come out in 3 or 4 years, which is specific to tissues. So the spleen or the kidney, and it's like a tiny little cell package, like a FedEx package in your bloodstream that will hit and target a tissue. Fantastic technology, and they're going to raise huge rounds. They're going to inject this technology more quickly into the system and respond. And I'm just very optimistic. I think that what I also tend to do, Mark, is in order to prevent myself from falling, I think of it almost a predator-prey relationship. So those who used to make their living trying to get us to buy stuff, and Terence used to talk about product fetishism. Those who made their living trying to sell us stuff, create large corporations to sort of extract stuff from our pocketbooks, derivatives of those are extracting from our attention now. So they want to build their guys, right? They're guys in investment houses. They're running big companies. They want to get 1 billion eyeballs. They're going to do anything they can. They're just playing a game, right? But you have to understand their game. And if their game is to post news items that get more traffic, and they're going to do it, it's their game with our mentality. So what we do is just choose not to play that game. And so I stopped watching network news in the United States in 1991. I was like, okay, I could see that game. It's very toxic. The news never changes. It's peppered with ads. It's like, I just don't like it. Don't like the way it makes me feel afterwards. I blocked it out. I blocked out online news mostly. So I don't even see any of this stuff. So my life goes ahead without any of that news feed. And I hear rumors of something going on, but it doesn't distract me from, because those rumors a lot of it's very fabricated. And so I just choose not to give it any energy and just carry on with my work, because it's a form of predation on my attention. And in the wild, I wouldn't be an animal sitting there with parts of me being eaten off. I would run for the hills. So it's just a personal choice of how do you protect your family, your kids. You actually have to create an immune system of your own to stay positive and have levity and carry on, because it's those people that can stay positive and have levity or solutionists are actually the ones who are more likely to create successful companies, raise better kids, and be healthy in the future. Those that are under the pall of the Chicken Little culture of it's all going to end, are spending valuable cycles on a virtual kind of nonsensical platform. And in some sense, natural selection is going to take them out of the gene pool, or at least the meme pool. So it's like your choice. In a sense, the elixirs, and I think Dennis will agree, and everybody else here, that the elixirs give you momentary pause from all that concern and anxiety. And they show you a grander thing, the grand cosmos, or the large heart that lies in your breast. And it takes you completely out of the mess of what humans create to feed each other, and it gives you relaxation from that. So does Burning Man, for example. And so that we know that there's different ways to be. And if we can feel so good a week after an elixir, why can't we just maintain that positivity and feeling and create our immune defenses and do our good works? Because those people are going to defend. Charles, I'll end this long diatribe with an insight that Charles and I had on the mountain here about 5 months ago. We were having a walk and I stopped and I had this vision of almost like a dinosaur, like a brontosaurus with its fat body and its tail over here and its head over here. And I thought, well, if the brontosaurus represents the bell curve and the center of the bell curve is most people, that tummy of the brontosaurus is not feeling good. It may be going through some indigestion. The tail of the brontosaurus is kind of the trailing off tail. People who are older, maybe not so well. But the tummy is sick, but the head is still looking into the future. The head is still carrying us into the future. And if you sort of ride on the head of that brontosaurus and help it find its way to health, help it find its way to nourishment or something it needs to do, the sick body will get well. You can't do much about the tail. It's just kind of drop stuff off. So that's a meta way of looking at how civilization may be rolling through this century. And with that, I'll shut up for the next question.
Well, thank you. The entheogens do that boundary dissolution, and so do these discussions. And it's I love hearing you quote Anne Elk's theory from Monty Python. Thank you.
Well, good. Okay. God blessings to everybody that's here. Giving thanks for having known who Terence was. I'm a person who was a major fan since hearing him on the radio in 1985. And I got to meet him at Salon in 97. And he used to always say the best story wins. And I had amazing interactions with him in the last 3 years of his life. Really spectacular, kind of unique interactions. I believe I was the last person he held the DMT pipe for in Hawaii in December of 1999. And so, you know, I love the man. I love the entheogens. And through Terence, I had met a man named Jim Shannon, who lived in Hawaii, New Earth Army. And he was big on the idea of archiving your life. And I just turned 65. Oh, I'm 66 now. But basically, I moved to Orcas Island 3 years ago and started writing my story, basically my story. And I just recently finished writing the story, and it's this. Nature Loves Courage. It's available on Amazon, and it documents these times. And I really think that it would be something that would be particularly for this group of people who understand who he was and the impact on his life on different people's lives would be interesting. And I just want to thank everybody for honoring Terence. It is true that posthumous glory is where it's at, because it's. Let me just. I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of what this book is. Okay. Nature Loves Courage is a hyperspace ride into the love, loss, life, death, and rebirth of Jacques Olivier, known as Paloko Lele, and his deep connection to Terence McKenna, culminating in Jacques' death on stage at Imagine Festival on a full moon Friday the 13th, 2019 on Orcas Island. If you want a glimpse of infinity, now's your chance. I literally had a widowmaker stroke while I was performing a concert in 2019, September 13th, Friday the 13th, full moon. And I lived to tell about it. So there it is. And a lot of it is about courage. I mean, I learned so much from Terence and just kind of being around him the last 3 years of his life and having these interactions. And he shaped the course of my life, even to today. The reason I'm on Orcas Island is because I met someone named Bruce Pavitt, who started Sub Pop Records. And he was a fan of Terence, and Terence knew him. And so in so many different ways, Terence altered the course of my life, and I just want to thank him and thank you all for honoring him.
Thank you, Jacques. I just want to let everyone know I was there. And in fact, Aaron came to my little hut and pounded on the door. I was just kind of resting because I had a later performance on the same stage as Jacques. And he said, "You've got to come. There's something happening to your friend." And by the time I got there, they had him on there were ENTs there around him, and there were people, you were being strapped down. And I realized, oh, he's in really good hands. There's really good people there. And then we're standing there and a helicopter comes over. My God, it's just like, wow, all the way from Bellingham. And it was fast. And then we're sort of stunned. I mean, Darren Long and I, Darren's the organizer of the Imagine Convergence, and we're just stunned. And the helicopter goes and we see he's on his way to Bellingham. Oh my God, this is so powerful. Everyone was just standing around like something, in a sense, of a lesson had happened for us about the frailty of life, and because Jacques was doing this beautiful performance, and at that peak of it, he went down, and the audience described this whole thing, and Jacques' own description of him going down actually was a big teaching. It was almost a psychedelic experience. And there were people in shock. We were trying to reach his son. We were trying to reach anybody who could be kind of a next of kin because they needed to have medical advice. And I got to meet all the good people who organized the event and who were in, and realized, oh my God, these are the people that are keeping us safe. They're going to save this man's life, this dear man's life, whose very theme music we've listened to over and over again on the Psychedelic Salon podcast. It is in our DNA. And in a sense, it was both a disturbing event within the festival, but it was also a huge grounding event. It brought us away from our festival-y kind of thing, brought us to ground. And I remember being, so there was an audience, I was going to be doing a storytelling, and I said, you know what, I can't do it. I can't do the storytelling. I can't bring to you what I was going to bring to you because something bigger has happened. And we need to sit with it. And so we sat in a circle and we let everyone share their feeling about it, because it was more important that we be here now with what was the sound of this helicopter going and taking this dear man to Bellingham, where they did a magnificent job to save his life. So I just wanted to add to Jacques' accounting, and this is probably all in his book.
I just have a quick question about the future of psychedelics and the place that psychedelics have in our society right now. We've seen a lot of positive movements with decriminalization and the use of psychedelics as therapeutics, but with that also comes a certain commodification and commercialization by individuals or entities who may not totally understand or respect the beautiful sacredness that psychedelics are. And I was just wondering what you guys had to say about the hopes and reservations and even fears that you may have about our society's embrace of psychedelics going forward? Thank you.
I guess I could speak to that, unless someone else wants to. I am concerned about this. As now psychedelics are becoming respectable, and being a capitalist society, the investment community has kind of glommed onto this, and they see the opportunity to cash in. It's a mixed bag. I think everyone in this forum would like to see psychedelics brought forward as a therapeutic modality that's accessible to many people. But then there's always the impulse in the capitalist realm to cash in on it. What I am concerned about, I'm concerned about that. For example, some of the moves that Compass has made. The Compass has been sort of stigmatized as the bad guy in this. I'm not sure that's totally true, but they're certainly making, they want to carve out an area of that belongs to them through patents and so on. My main concern is that, as usual, as it always has been, the indigenous people who have been the stewards of this knowledge and the stewards of this genetics for thousands of years are the ones that are being pushed aside and thrown under the bus. This has always been the story, as capitalist society co-opts resources, land, and other things. So this is happening in the psychedelic space. One would hope that the lessons that one can learn from these medicines will get through to the capitalists, and in many cases it has. That not everyone involved in the commercialization of psychedelics is a bad person. In fact, most of them probably are not. They have good intentions, but it's hard to maintain the clarity. And so I think it's a story still being told. I think it will be interesting to see in the next 10 or 20 years, in the next 10 years anyway. I probably won't be around for another 20 years, but to see how it plays out. What I would not like to see happen is a situation where, yes, psilocybin therapy is available to people if they can pay $30,000 and go to a clinic and have this therapy. But if you want to go into the woods and pick mushrooms, then you're committing a felony. That's just not right. So we need to acknowledge the indigenous origins of this wisdom, and we need to give people opportunities to have access to at least the natural psychedelics in a way that is not going to create legal risks for them in a way, in other ways. So, in the interest of brevity, I'll stop there, but it is a problem. Much positive and much to be concerned about is happening in this space right now. I don't think any of us imagined 10 years ago that we'd be here looking at this societal transformation that's being brought by psychedelics. So all in all, and overall, I think it's a good thing. I think the general trends are positive, but there are pitfalls. We need to be thoughtful about how we go forward. So that's my 2 cents worth on that.
Thank you very much. I'm first and foremost, I'd just love to echo what Dennis is saying. And I mean, probably our most beloved shaman is experiencing these very very salient socioeconomic troubles. And yeah, anyway, my question is, Dennis, you and Paul Stamets sort of toyed with the idea of panspermia and whether it was a logical proposition or not. And you kind of took the position that the mushroom might have originated on Earth, and possibly could go out into space, but not the other way. And so in the spirit of Boundary Dissolution Day, I would just maybe ask you to toy with the opposite side of that argument, as your brother might have, maybe steelman the argument of could mushrooms come from outer space, just as a yeah. Thank you.
I can give a little insight into that. If you faithful to Lorenzo's comment about Terence contradicting himself and Dennis's observation, in the 80s, he was talking about mushrooms coming from some galactic source. In the 90s, if you listen to Salon podcast, he says, when I used to believe that the mushroom came from outer space. So he sort of bounced around. And one of the jobs that I have in my scientific career is to work with NASA and others on where life can arise on planets and how. And I was part of the Mars 2020 landing site selection process on a team that had a particular site, and we made it to this, like the finals. There were 3 sites. The one that was chosen was Jezero Crater. And we developed all these models with a huge amount of input on what it would take for a planet to generate a living system. And we have a meteorite collection where we look at the organics in the meteorites and we grind up those meteorites and put them in buffered solution and see what we get. We, of course, don't have organisms in those meteorites, and even microfossils that you might find in shirts in Australia. Nothing's ever been found in a meteorite. So the concept of the Earth or Mars being seeded from elsewhere is still viable, but it's not a testable hypothesis. And so we go on the assumption that life starts intimately in the planets that it evolves for. It may spread locally. So say if microbial life started on Mars, it could have spread to the early Earth. But all indications are that the Earth was a viable nursery for the life that's here now. And so because we can't test the other hypothesis, so panspermia is kind of a nice notion. And if we find meteorites with microbial community evidence in them, like, okay, well, it's probably a viable notion, but it doesn't explain where that life originally started. And so
well, fair enough. I deeply appreciate that position. And I should say that to see you go from a guy wearing like a leather jacket, a leather vest that I didn't know, to the utter Merlin who you are, transforming therapeutic values and scientific values into this. But with all due respect, I know your position. I just wanted to hear from Dennis and maybe to see what he could conjure from like steel manning a hypothetical argument from Terence. So yeah, with respect, could we hypothetically hear from Dennis what maybe he thought on this subject?
I'll try and be brief because I know.
Thank you so much. With deepest respect to you, Dr. Gamer. Thank you so much.
I mean, the panspermia idea is an appealing idea, and as Bruce points out, it's appealing. Some of the most appealing ideas are the ones that can't be proven, and so they don't rise to the level of theories because something built in a theory in order to qualify as that has to define itself as how do you disprove it. This was always the basis of my problem with the basis of the time wave and Terence's idea about the time wave, because he never defined what would invalidate it other than this prediction about 2012. And I guess that invalidated it. But anyway, I'm digressing. Mushrooms are not from outer space. I'm sorry. Mushrooms are well defined in the phylogeny of Earth. It just doesn't make sense that, from some other place, psilocybin mushrooms originated. They were on Earth 75 million years ago before there were any primates around who could appreciate them. And we understand their phylogeny very well. So no, mushrooms are not extraterrestrial.
I know, Chief. I know. I was just asking.
This is why he's the Bard McKenna and not the Dean McKenna.
Thank you so much.
Right.
I appreciate
so
Coleman
is up next. Go ahead, Coleman.
Thank you so much.
All
Bye.
right. That's enough of that. We could go on, but that's it.
Hi. So my question is about, kind of ties into the origin of life stuff, and I love Terence's musings on glossolalia. personally, I've had these experiences with glossolalia, and he's one of the people, the only people that I've felt that really has contextualized this experience and gave it a lot of it gave me a lot of understanding of what happened to me. So I'd like to tie that into how Terence had this idea that glossolalia could have been this precursor to language. And Bruce, you have done these, you've made such great strides in your origin of life theories. And my question is, I know that you came up with these origin of life theories during deep visionary states. And so my question is, have you ever had any deep visionary states that connect to kind of the stoned ape theory and this precursor of language, kind of the origin of language coming from something like glossolalia or coming from the psilocybin experience? And if you've ever kind of gone there in vision based on some of Terence's musings, or if that's something that you've ever if that's an avenue you've gone down in your states, because yeah, I think I can leave it at that.
Never gone down that rabbit hole. It might be fun to explore, but no, never have.
Dennis,
Okay.
you were there for those experiments and had your own experiences. What do you think about Coleman's question?
Yeah, I think the glossolalia thing has merit. When I've talked about the stoned ape theory, I've tried to link it to synesthesia. I think that synesthesia is very much important in the origins of language, and synesthesia is one thing that psychedelics and particularly mushrooms can do. I'm in the interest of time, I won't say more. What I would like to mention here is that I'm planning, the McKenna Academy is going to do a virtual symposium on the stoned ape theory this summer sometime. We're not sure when exactly, probably July, because there's a new printing of Food of the Gods, and we're going to do it around that. And we've got some really amazing people that are going to present at that symposium. So stay tuned, because we're going to unpack this whole stoned ape theory in detail. And just watch the McKenna Academy for notifications. It's going to happen. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Robert Forte is up next.
You know, I'm just delighted by the medium. I came in for what I thought was going to be a few minutes, and here I am in a room with all you guys talking about Terence. And so many memories about him. My relationship began with him in the early 1980s when I had organized a number of people, a number of conferences to re-examine the subject of psychedelics, understand what happened in the 60s, and then trying to find ways to reignite the proper use of them. What went wrong in the 60s? And one of the things that came up was the sensationalism, where the esoteric became exoteric. Characters like Leary, who had broadcast them in this evangelical way that drew people that weren't really prepared for them, or scientists that didn't, it was a confrontive kind of thing. And so we were going to reintroduce psychedelics, but in a gradual way. And I met Terence in this context. And I have to say, I just fell in love with the guy because he was so incredibly brilliant and so articulate. And he cast such a nice image, a man that could travel to the stars, but grounded in his garden with a beautiful wife and two beautiful children. And he seemed like he was going to be such a great spokesperson for this new wave of psychedelia. And I transcribed some of these conferences word by word, sitting at my computer, listening to the tapes. And I'll never forget my experiences going through Terence's lectures, you know, trying to find the end of the sentence in this talking and talking. And we became friends, and I supported him. I heard what someone had said earlier, maybe it was Bruce in the clubhouse, about Terence thinking his very best contribution was when he and Dennis wrote the Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide. And I agreed with that, because what that was a decentralizing of the psychedelic movement. It made psychedelia possible for anyone with the discipline to grow mushrooms in their home. But as time went on, I'm getting to my question because I really want to address this to Dennis. And I so appreciate you all these years, Dennis, your honesty and your intelligence, your love for your brother, and your awareness, like you're saying just a minute ago, that he was a bard, he was a poet, he wasn't a scientist, he wasn't even really a philosopher, he was a showman, he provoked people. But Dennis, what you said a minute ago was it didn't seem to matter if what he said was true or made sense. And I want to debate that point because I think it matters a whole lot that if you're going to be a charismatic leader and lead people into these mysteries, then God damn it, it better make sense. Or what you're doing is you're leading people astray and you're creating chaos that might not necessarily be fertile. So somewhere in there is a question. Bruce, I also want to say it's so great to see you here, but it's on a screen. I disagree strongly with almost everything you said about COVID, that I'm afraid I'm just going to have to come over there with a bottle of wine and have it out with you. And I hope that soon. So,
well, it's great to see you too, Robert. And when they lift the lockdown here, British Columbia is being very strict about it. You could bring that bottle over, and we'll sit down and hash this out. Maybe literally hash this out. So thank you for that. Those kind words. I think the thing about Terence, I didn't mean that. I mean, a lot of times what he said didn't make sense, but he could present it in a way as though it made sense. And what Terence did, more than saying, I have the truth, I understand the truth, and I'm going to share it with you, the yearning masses. I mean, he never approached it like that. He was never saying, laying it down in that way. The way he presented it was, he wanted to stimulate people to think and give them permission to think for themselves. And so it was like, he used to say, psychedelics are dangerous, not because of anything pharmacological. They're dangerous because they give you funny ideas. And funny ideas are inherently dangerous. And he was a man who dealt in funny ideas. And he took great delight in just throwing this stuff out there, just these crazy notions, He didn't care if they were right or wrong. He left people he didn't know if they were right or wrong. He just put them out there as like these thought memes, and people could see that and resonate with it and say, well, that's bullshit. I've never heard such horseshit in my life. Or people might say, well, yeah, wait a minute, maybe there's something to this. So I think that was the great talent that Terence had, is that he invited people to think for themselves, to rev up these critical minds that we have and put them through their paces. So in that sense, he was never wedded even to, his fondest ideas like the time wave and so on, or the extraterrestrial mushroom. These were ideas. He was never totally convinced of either. I'm convinced, but he said, well, interesting ideas. What do the rest of you think? What does the community of interest think? And that was Terence's, both his talent and his humility. And that's why he escaped the temptation to present himself as a guru or a wise shaman or a cult leader or anything like that. It was like he did not accept that. He just said, I'm just out here playing with ideas, playing in the fields of the Lord, as he would say. So that's my thought on that.
Yeah, thank you. So good to see you. And I just want to add one more thing, because there were about 30 minutes that I spent with Terence in the one of the bedrooms in the big house at Esalen that have affected me so profoundly over all these years, and I'm forever grateful to him for that. And it's been a real honor to be friends with you and your brother, and I look forward to that bottle of wine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Abraham is up next.
So I'm very glad to be here. I'm especially glad to see Dennis McKenna because his brother Terence McKenna has been probably my main influence, at least at an intellectual level. And thankfully, it's been brought up the concept of the origin of language being synesthetic, which is to me particularly compelling, mainly because of the main tenets of the symbolist project, in which symbolism as a poetic or as an aesthetic implies that there are in fact these objects that are purely aesthetic in the sense that they just are, they have no necessarily linguistic connection, which hold semiotic meaning within them. And so this a practical example within the use of symbolism in poetry would be something like colors that have a sort of universal feeling or understanding to them or a meaning. So, I mean, the reason why language being inherently synesthetic is beautiful is also because of the connection to Rimbaud, to Arthur Rimbaud, which I know that Terence McKenna referenced a couple of times, and saying that if language or if poetry were to be perfected and a language that were perfect were to be wielded, it would have to be synesthetic in nature. It would have to derange all the senses and bring them all back together. And I'm just going to reemphasize on the themes that were already commented on. But this to me is also particularly alluding to the idea of the word and the image, and how language is more imagistic fundamentally, or more visual than it is verbal or linguistic, and that the substrate of meaning is in fact poetic or rhetorical, made out of figures of speech instead of logical or syntactical arrangements, which would be my proposition in regards to looking at this substrate of language, this pure embodiment of language, which might be the precise way of looking at it. Similarly to the DMTLs that were talked about often, I've come to analyze it as language as such. If language were to exist in any underlying existence, right, it would have to be composed out of all possible manifestations of language. I think this is what the DMTLs represent, and also something that is within the human body, which is the very potential of language. So yes, and I'm reading here in the comments that the perfect language would be telepathy. So I mean, this of course connects to the idea of McKenna, and of course of Dennis McKenna, of what I've come to call the tele-imago, right? This collective sculpture made out of pure hallucinations by a collective, in which there actually is understanding taking place by way of some purely non-verbal manifestation of what is being understood or said. Yeah, so that would be my clarification for telepathy, that it doesn't have to be.
Bruce has just put in the Terence McKenna on the Natch. Do you want to introduce that, Bruce, and respond to what Abraham has been discussing?
Yeah, and I agree that Terence's thought his thought was at the intersection of language, visual component. He talked about the DMT elves creating objects, presenting objects from language and showing how language could construct objects. This fascinating synesthetic conurbation of his experience is tremendous. And we attempted, if you look in the link, if you can play that video anytime, back in 1998, when he and I sort of started a collaboration, he was fascinated about virtual worlds and the representation of humans and objects and agents and bots and weirdness and design in these very, very low res virtual worlds of the late 90s, where you had a modem connection. And that's what I was working on. I brought the whole community together. I'd held conferences, written a book called Avatars. And so that's what brought Terence and I together. And so we tried an experiment, and it wasn't kind of the bookend for the experiment at La Chirera in a way, because this was about 2 months before his seizure that led him to his hospitalization and then to his demise in April 3rd, 2000. And what we did was we set up in the house, we brought a Finn had bought a PC because Terence was a kind of a Mac man at the time and it couldn't run these environments. So Finn had actually brought a PC to Hawaii. We set it up. Finn went into the virtual environment and built a hyperboreal gate, which would represent a visual way to enter into a special world designed by a guy named Pollen, which is a good name for somebody making a DMT infused world. And he made this DMT visionary world where as soon as you went in, you donned an avatar that represented you. And at one point, Terence went in and his default avatar went to the green bug-eyed lawnmower. And he switched himself to an alien. And we found out later why. And he called his avatar Zone Ghost. Because in a letter from 1995, you can see actually Kevin Whitesides has it in the archive. He said, "One day I will be a zone ghost in cyberspace." And so zone ghost was a term, and I don't know where it comes from. Someone will let us know. And he became, that moment in February of 1999, the zone ghost in cyberspace into the DMT world where he took his audience and they walked around and they did things. And Finn made this whole thing happen from the side. And this is a video capture of us in Terence's house, very close up. So Jim Essex was running a camera, a high-8 camera on Terence, and it's very close. It's the house that Jacques actually caretook for years. And it's up in the library, and it's Terence doing his hunt and peck typing. And as he types, his lips are moving and his tongue is moving like an old-fashioned mouthing person of the 10th century where they had to speak the words in order to write them. Or when you read, you spoke, you mouthed the words. It was very interesting watching this. And then he, for hours, was inside this world, text chatting, visual interface. He was the zone ghost moving around. And what I realized as I got to know him better later was the landscape mattered a lot. And we talk about invisible landscapes. And this was a visible landscape made by language, made by code, that created an ethereal kind of presencing. And we compared notes later that night. And I said, how did this compare with a DMT experience? Because Terence had earlier helped me with my first elixir experience. I had waited until I was 37 because I didn't really trust them. And then I met Terence and I thought, this guy is dialed in. If he says that there's a landscape worth exploring, I'm going to go in there. And so he was exploring my landscape of avatar cyberspace. And I asked him, how does this compare with, the DMT experience? And it was a classic Terence response. It's not unlike DMT. It's not unlike DMT. And it was this beautiful kind of a union. And just to close this thing out, so what we realized later was he was having terrible dreams. So one of the first things he reported when we got to the house was, "Oh my God, I'm having dreams. I just can't explain. They're so strange. They're so strange." And Jim looked at him and said, "He's this ashen-faced. He is just not looking good." And in the end of the video, and I'll send you another one later as we're wrapping up, the camera caught Terence lying back. And Dennis will remember how Terence sort of lay on his elbows, and he'd been smoking. And then he turned and his face turned to us and it looked at us, and he went into this shit-eating grin. And I swear, in that video, and the second one I'll send you is Terence McKenna live stream, and it's a triptych of beautiful photos and Constance Demby's music. Up to that moment, Terence was the elf. He was the elf, and there was a delight, there was magic, he was in joy. And Finn and I actually talked about this later, that, well, Terence had experienced tech novelty, the novelty that was not unlike DMT, brought to the public where he could be the zone ghost, and it was a visible landscape made by code, by language. And it was his thing. And we had brought this to this man. And he only had 2 months of semi-normal life left before the terrible seizure. that started the process of his transformation. So in some weird way, this man tracking all this from La Terreur in 1971 to February 99, this is sort of a bookend to his quest for the weird. And in a sense, the weird was going to come through cyberspace, you know, and that the whole idea of the singularity, the AI coming through cyberspace. But he got to touch these worlds. And that's where, in a sense, we handed it off, because at that point, he was getting ready for his greatest boundary dissolution experiment, which was passing from this realm, passing through medications that put him into altered states. And he reports this to Eric Davis, you know, that there's so many ways to go into these altered, I had no idea. You know, these meds do it, you know, and there's people walking around the streets that are totally in altered worlds or fantastical worlds. It's just, I had no idea. I mean, it's an eye opener for Terence. And I want to report to you, perhaps this will be my closing remarks, looking at our time. It was reported to me by people that were with him in Occidental several days before he passed, that there was a moment which Terence kind of got himself up to make an utterance. And he said, and the person who was there can actually sort of confirm this and ask, but he said, psychedelics, they're not about ideas. They're not about all that shit. They're about love. And everybody in the room was like, what? You know, the ultimate gearhead, like 50s sci-fi, they're about love. And coming out of him was this sense of disillusion, of the boundary of all of the ideas and the stuff and novelty and this and that was gone. He was dissolved by this tumor, and he was releasing to some place that was different. And that place was coming out of his heart. Some kind of a thing, whether gratitude or some force, it was love. And Lorenzo and I revealed this in the 2012 Salon day. We were crying, the whole room was crying that this had happened. And we called it Terence's greatest rap, 9 seconds. And I wanted to bring this, and I would like to bring this every year to this event, because Terence arrived at the place that these elixirs are really most potently here on this earth for, which was a feeling of healing and okayness and connection, and the boundaries dissolved and acceptance. Just before he passed, he went back into a kind of a coma state, and he was gone, you know, April 3rd, a few days later. But it was really important to bring you that this man took so many journeys and so many trips, and he came down to something as fundamental as this. And that is a message for our time. This is a great message.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you for that, Bruce. We're at 5 o'clock. Do you want to bring this to a close, or do you want to do another question, Bruce?
If the final questioner can bring us something of levity, and not a serious heavy thing, but make a funny sound, an observation to take us out, it would be lovely, because it's a 2-hour. I just saw Lorenzo yawning. It's a 2-hour, 3-hour thing for me. And of course, you know, I can go on forever, but for sure, go ahead.
So Stephen's been waiting patiently. So Stephen, if you can just bring us a levity level piece here, you can take us out.
Yeah, I just really love to share how much I appreciate the community, how much I appreciate what Terence brought to the world and what you continue to bring forward in his legacy. I'd share that because this kind of started in Clubhouse, and that's how I come by it, even though I had registered for it. It's how I had the remembrance of it. I'll share that the Grays are going to be participating on the platform, and I feel that the legacy could potentially be put onto the blockchain. And I feel there's so many synchronicities that have occurred in this past week for me, that I've connected with so many folks that tie sort of this group together and other disparate groups that have bring together kind of a magic and alchemy that I'd appreciate to potentially take it offline and just have a brief conversation at some point in the near future. But hee hee ha ha. That'll be my concluding remark.
Do you all want to try some glossolalia at the same time?
I mean, yeah, sure. I'd love to.
Vocal jam.
Can you lead us? I know you can do this.
That's my comment.
Psychedelic
or clueless for the brotherhood.
Should I go for it? You want me to go with the glossolalia?
Yeah, let's all try some glossolalia.
Wow, 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 wow,
Oh, bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have regular Levity salons. If you want to be part of my little world, Bruce Damer at Patreon. So patreon.com/Bruce Damer. And I'm starting all these new initiatives in science at damer.com. You'll see some of the first words. Please contact me through damer.com. And we're going to have all these wonderful goodies coming your way, beautiful discussions. So sign up and continue the conversation.
Thanks.
And then, Dennis, do you want to do one last plug of what you're up to? And then Lorenzo?
Well, I've been putting stuff in the chat box. So, yeah, I mean, just go to McKenna.academy to see what we're up to. There are some events already there. We have a fireside chat coming up with Brian Morarescu, who wrote The Immortality Key. That'll be happening in April. And then we're working on a mini symposium, probably a day or an afternoon symposium on the stone date theory, which we're not sure when it will be. We're just getting organized, but there'll be some amazing speakers there. And this is to honor or to promote, I guess, the reprinting of Food of the Gods, which has just been brought out again by Penguin UK. So that's upstream a little bit. And just go to the Academy and check it out. This is what we're doing. And it's been an honor to participate in this. Thank you to Bruce and Charles and Lorenzo and all the rest who organized this. And on the Academy site, as you probably know, you can look at the events from 1 year ago today, the 20th anniversary. It's all up there on Crowdcast, so it's it's open access and everything was recorded. There's no charge or anything to that. So check it out, and we'll catch you all downstream.
And Lorenzo, you want to talk about your regular salons?
No, actually, I just want to thank Bruce for hosting this and to acknowledge the fact that without Bruce's support back in the early days, there wouldn't have been a psychedelic salon. So he really had a lot to do with me going forward. And I want to make sure everybody realize what an important person he's been in this whole event of keeping Terence McKenna's thoughts and ideas alive. So thank you very much, Bruce. And in the spirit of Terence McKenna, I guess I'd just like to say, keep the old faith and stay high.